Well, good afternoon, everybody. In this talk, we'll be exploring the underpinnings of the Eastern perspective on sound, which it traces all the way back to what is called Nāda, translated as the soundless sound in the voice of the silent. Research has shown that modern humans skew heavily towards visual dominance. It is said that about 65% of the people are visual or spatial learners, while only about 30% are auditory learners. The near ubiquity of screens around us, as you find one right in front of you, and the ensuing bombardment of visual stimuli right from childhood is only making the skew worse. However, in the ancient East, oral transmission and hence auditory sense was given primacy. And the rudimentary sense of hearing, with its associated primordial element of ether, was considered to be the first sense element to be evolved. Hence, all of creation, or involution of spirit into matter, was seen from the standpoint of sound or music. And naturally, spiritual evolution as well was also considered from the same standpoint. Since healing is one of the topics of today's seminar, it behooves us to take note of the fact that the greatest ailment afflicting humanity is that of what is called Sakkayaditthi in Pali, referred to in the voice of the silence, or Satkaya Drishti in Sanskritam, which is the delusion of personality, also called the great heresy, the idea that we all are separate and have a separate personality that is different from everybody else. This ailment exists so long as illusion persists or Maya persists. And who awakens this illusion? It is the mind. In the voice of the silent, it is the great slayer of the real. And hence, the statement that you see in red from Nāda Bindu Upanishad brings it all together. That Nāda, the Sanskrit here says, Nādo yavan manastavat. Nādo yavat manastavat. Mind exists so long as Nāda exists. So let us look at creation from the perspective of sound, which will give us certain hints on overcoming this disease of all diseases, that of the great heresy, dire heresy, it is said, of separateness. Now, as students of theosophy, we are very used to looking at the stages of manifestation in symbols or glyphs or even as numbers. However, the same sequence can be conceived of from the uniquely Eastern perspective of sound. Here, we will only be considering the terms of the formula, as HPB calls it, in the abstract, and we will not be tying it down to any particular level of manifestation, of which there are 7. Now, the causeless cause is absolute silence, as we read from the handout earlier, or darkness, and is assigned the number 0. It is not even represented on the slide. In it, the first differentiation or first cause, spirit, is called in most Eastern cosmogonies Brahma, arises, which can be correlated to ideation or Nāda. Nāda, we can say, roughly translates to reverberance and assign the number 1. And in all cosmogony, this first cause is shown to separate from itself the substance or basis of all subsequent objective manifestations. We can say Brahma Vak, which when be correlated to voice, ideation voice, or Shabda, the primordial unmodified sound. And these two, ideation and voice, can be assigned the number 2. referencing father, mother, Purusha Prakriti or spirit substance. Then Brahma is said to be reborn as Viraj through, remember, not from Vak, giving rise to father, mother, son, or ideation, voice, and word. This, from the perspective of sound, is Om, the enunciated Akshara. Akshara literally means inexhaustible. It also is used to mean alphabet. While Om is said to be monosyllabic when pronounced, it is formed of three sounds, the A, U, and the M. Hence, it is the trinitarian one, as we see in the ST. And so this is assigned the number 3. Now, Viraj in manifestation as Kala Hamsa is the word made flesh, or the creative logos. Now, this student never had an intuitive feel for this distinction between the word and its concrete representation until it was seen from the perspective of sound. Here, the Kala Hamsa is also Om, but when expressed in writing, requires 4 glyphs or matras to represent. When spoken or enunciated, this monosyllabic pranava or Om consists of 3 sounds in one, but when concretized into writing, needs 4 glyphs to represent. These 4 glyphs are depicted as Kala Hamsa in the Nāda Bindu Upanishad as A, forming the right wing, the U, forming the left wing, the Ma, forming the tail, and the 4th glyph, that shortens the Ma, which is called Ardhamatra or Halanta, to be the head. This, of course, will be assigned the number 4. Now, all this sums up to, of course, 10, as we saw in the first talk, forming the higher tetractys. Now, this manifested Om, when enunciated in Vedic Sanskrit, requires us to choose one of 3 tones for each vowels. Of the 3 sounds of Om, A and U are vowels or swaras, while Ma is a consonant or vyanjana. The base tone for vowels is called udatta. 2 semitones lower than the base tone is called anudatta and is represented in Devanagari by a horizontal dash under the vowels. And 1 semitone higher is called Swarita, which is represented in Devanagari with a vertical dash on top of the vowels. Now, this sounds as follows. I'm not a singer, but I'll give it a shot. If the base sound is, we'll call this Sa, say, Sa, then you would have Sa, Ni, Sa, Re, Sa, Ni, Sa, Re. Those are the Anudatta and Swaritas. And if you've heard any Vedic chant, you will see that it sounds very similar to how I enunciated it right now. Now, each tonal choice for the vowel A, we have 3 choices for U. So if I choose Swarita for A, I have 3 choices for U. And hence, we have 3 times 3 or 9 choices. All of which really only represent the one monosyllabic Om, and hence it is 1 and 9. As we see in the Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, 4th stanza, 5th verse, it says, the voice of the Lord Swabhavat, the numbers for his 1 and 9. This is the lower or manifested tetractys represented by Pythagoras with these 9 triangles that we already saw in the first talk, within the one triangle that subsumes them all. Again, 1 and 9. Now, we come to the last level of manifestation where language is created. We saw how Om, the three-in-one sound, gave rise to the higher tetractors, and how, along with the three tonal variations of Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, it gave rise to the lower tetractors or 9-in-1. Now, that same Om, in its final manifestation as the triple hypostasis or avasthas or Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, is said to give rise to the Maheshwara Sutras. Now, tradition holds that Maheshwara or Shiva, as Nataraja, the dancing deity, completed his cosmic dance of creation and finally played his damaru, which is this instrument you see here, in 7 pairs or 14 times, which gave rise to the following sutras. Now, these can be correlated to the two contrary forces of centripetal and centrifugal force, or positive and negative forces, interacting to bring forth the 7 creations found in all cosmogonies. The Maheshwara Sutras that you see here sound perhaps like gibberish when read out. I will read it out. It sounds as follows. It says, A I Un, Ril Rik, E Om, I Ouch, Ha Ya Varat, Lan, Nyamangananam, Jaban, Gadadash, Jabagadadash, Kapa Chatata, Chatata, Kapai, Shashasar, Hal. Now, this totally sounds like gibberish, but it forms the foundation on which Panini's grammar stands. And unlike English grammar, Sanskrit grammar is not just prescriptive, but actually generative, meaning it creates words from stems called dhatus and generates the entire Sanskrit compendium of words. At this point, you might be asking, but why is language given such importance in Eastern tradition? So let's consider some germane, perhaps modern research related to perception to get some insights into this. When we see, for example, a tree, there is what is called a bottom-up perception, which is quite intuitive, actually. The image of the tree is projected onto the retina, which converts it into electrical signals for the brain. The brain recreates, we think faithfully, an internal representation of the tree in our mind. The process up to this point is called sensation in the ST. Now, a sui generis process called apperception in the ST takes place. We perceive this internal representation as the Cartesian non-self, but related to self, and bring it in relation with other internal objects or categories, which establishes for it a position in the world of name and form, or nama rupa, we say tree. Simultaneously, with the bottom-up process, a non-intuitive top-down process also takes place. The frame of reference, which is our belief or value system, that which generates meaning for us, is pushed down or projected onto this reality. So if I were a lumberjack, I wouldn't see the tree, but rather the logs. If I were hungry, I wouldn't see the tree, but rather the fruits on the tree, and so on. Now the bottom-up process is converting sensation into language, both the language of the mind, which are thoughts, and of the lip, which is the spoken language. And this top-down process is projecting that internal language onto reality. This is why Carl Jung said that perception is projection. It is impossible to perceive anything outside of your frame of reference, which is essentially your language or qualia. And hence, a language is reality. And since all of language is generated from Om, as we have seen, the Mandukyopanishad says, all this is verily Om. Om ityeta aksharam idam sarvam. But as we have seen, in 3 stages, the same Om has generated more and more heterogeneous realities. until on this plane, our internal language or frame of reference becomes unique to each person as our personality. As the postmodernists would say, our personality is a unique intersectionality. But this is the disease, the great dire heresy of separateness. So if language is reality, then to elevate our reality, we have to elevate our language, that of the mind as well as the tongue. And to do so, we have to look to music as the most refined form of language for inspiration. Now, in Eastern music, also called Sangeeta, one song typically consists of two aspects. These two aspects interleave each other. There is the manodharma and the kriti. Manodharma is the free-form improvisation, while kriti is the fixed composition. When you take a correlation of this into our life, these seem to correlate, manodharma seems to correlate to free will, and that of this fixed composition to destiny. Manodharma, when you are practicing it or when you're singing it, is said to be beautiful when it is in greater fidelity with the raga in which the kriti is composed. While there is room for improvisation, it needs to be within the confines of the raga. In life, this would seem to correspond to the use of free will strictly within the confines of one's swadharma. The kriti aspect of the song is said to be beautiful when it is in exact adherence to the composition as conceived by the composer. In life, this corresponds to the complete surrender to the decree of karma, which proceeds from Ishvara and hence is divine will. Robert Crosby calls the free will aspect of life sowing, and the destiny aspect as reaping. So it is by perfecting our sowing, insofar as using our free will strictly within the confines of our dharma, and reaping, wherein we surrender to the divine will completely, where free will is not at play. The combination of sowing and reaping and perfecting of this, we elevate the song of life, and hence the discordant disease of separateness.